Deborah Kruger, an award-winning contemporary fiber artist, creates textile paintings, sculptures, and installation that give voice to endangered birds, endangered indigenous language, and ecological disasters. For over 10 years, Deborah has made art from feathers that are fabricated from plastic bags, encaustic, waxed linen thread, wire, and horsehair. Her pieces are influenced by the indigenous art from the Amazon, which often incorporates feathers into their ceremonial objects. Deborah refers to her work as abstraction with a voice. Pattern and decoration make the work visually compelling while quietly presenting her ecological and cultural concerns. Through her art practice, Deborah balances making objects of beauty that convey layered meaning about habitat fragmentation, bird migration, species extinction, and the loss of indigenous languages. Kruger's feathered abstract artwork is informed by fiber traditions, but is made with recycled plastic bags. The feathers are cut from fused recycled plastic bags and then silkscreened with images of endangered birds from her personal drawings. The feathers are then overprinted with text of endangered languages, world languages whose last living speakers are in steep decline. Her pieces also speak to the forced migration of humans, who are displaced by war, poverty, famine, climate change, and habitat fragmentation. The forms in Deborah's work are inspired by murmuration, the beguiling and fantastical shapes formed by the coordinated flight patterns of starling flocks. Many of her pieces also follow the outlines of countries and states that are home to endangered bird species. Since 2012, Deborah has run 360 Xochi Quetzal, an artists and writers residency and retreat in Chapala, Mexico. Since then, she has hosted over 75 artists, writers, and performers from all over the world. Deborah believes that treating yourself to time away from your daily responsibilities is a powerful way to deepen your art practice and to network with other creatives who understand your passion and lifestyle. Deborah's accolades are many. Some recent career highlights include an upcoming solo exhibition at the Tennessee Tech University coming in 2023. Her prize-winning work was featured at the Bernard Heller Museum in New York City, the Contemporary Art Museum in Raleigh, North Carolina, the Atlanta Hartsfield International Airport in Atlanta, Georgia, and the Diego Rivera Museum in Mexico City. Perhaps the most exciting recent news is that two of Deborah's large-scale environmental artworks have been acquired by the Museum of Art and Design in New York City and will be on view beginning in May 2024. Please help us in welcoming Deborah Kruger by adding a comment in the chat and letting us know where you're coming from in the world. Hi, Deborah.
What a beautiful introduction.
Isn't that gorgeous? Yes. And hello, everybody. I am super excited that we are all here together. Yeah. Let's see, where is everybody coming from today? Oh, Marilyn from New Zealand. Yay. We got the wonderful thing is we have people coming from all over the world. Janice from South Carolina. Pictures within from Seattle. Hi, Seattle. I'm just up the road. Oop, we have a Bellingham person. I'm really just up the road from Bellingham. Marilyn from Tasmania. Abby from Barcelona. Wow. Andrea from the UK. Ooh, Yakima, Washington. Yay. West Yorkshire. Evelyn from Atlanta. Hi, everybody. I am super excited that you all are joining us. And Jenny from Victoria. Gosh, everybody from everywhere. It's awesome. I am even more excited to be sharing this evening with Deborah. This evening. Well, it's afternoon for some, it's evening for some, and it's morning for some. Yeah. So I met Deborah
many years ago, actually. I was familiar with her artwork before I had a chance to meet her at her fabulous residency. I got to go to the Xochi Quetzal residency twice, and in that, I got a chance to see Deborah's work and to get to know this amazing person and her process. So I'm super excited to get to share this time with you and a person I am honored to call friend also. So let's get started. Let's let Deborah talk.
Wow.
There we go. I'm going to make her. There we go. There she is. I'm going to make a nice big screen there.
Thank Fibre Arts Australia Take Two for this really marvelous invitation. And thank you, all of you from around the world, for showing up today. And if you have questions, please keep tapping them into your chat box, and we'll get to answer as many as we can.
Yay. So Deborah works with recycled materials, much as myself. So I am just have a passion for that recycled, using things that we have discarded. And as we said in the intro, Deborah works with plastic bags a lot. And I would love, Deborah, if you would tell us more about your technique, because it's incredibly fascinating.
Well, probably a lot of you who are listening would self-describe as OCD, and I'm no exception. And I've sort of lost count of how many different layers there are to each feather, but I think I would probably guess 20 different things go into making a feather. So it's a very complex process. And I think in a lot of ways, when you have a complex process, there's so much information that you can pack in. So I developed this technique so that I could say as many things as I wanted to about endangered birds and about endangered indigenous languages. One thing we were just talking about while we were getting ready to queue up is that on YouTube, there's a really beautiful documentary about how I make my work, and it takes place, it's shot in my studio, my production studio in Chapala, Mexico. So you can just hop on there, and it says, I think the title is Deborah Kruger Art and Process. And if you haven't subscribed, you know what to do.
Yay, there's a link for that.
Oh, thank you. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. Also, a shout out to our behind the scenes tech.
Yes, and just here supporting us with comments and your questions. So everybody remember, you can ask questions live if you have things you want to pry out of Deborah's head. So the first thing I'm thinking about is I'm thinking about plastic and, you know, how kind of thin and fragile it can be. So how do you deal with that part? Because when we look at those feathers, they look like fabric. What kind of magic have you done there?
Well, let me just back up a little bit and say that my training originally was at FIT in New York, and I was trained as a textile designer, and I spent the first 10 years of my life doing wallpaper design. So wow. Pattern and decoration and design is very hardwired into me at this point. And I had an aha moment, which I refer to a little bit in the documentary. As you mentioned, I do also run a residency program. And when people would apply for the residency, I would find myself saying some of the same things over and over as feedback. And one of them was, your ideas are great and your work is really strong, but they're not integrated. And I think it's when, as artists, we can really integrate our ideas, our form, and our content that the work gets really juicy and powerful. And I can't say unfortunately, but one sad day, I realized that that was true of my own artwork. And at that point, I felt that I was saying that my work was about endangered birds. But if I wasn't there to say that, the work wasn't saying it clearly enough. Not that I feel like work has to entirely speak for itself. I'm not from that school at all.
Yeah, no.
But I took a year off from what I was working with, which was fabric encaustic, mixed materials like that. And spent a year, and I have a blog on my website called Wandering in the Desert, and it talks about this year of just like, what the hell am I doing? Like, I had a good thing going. Why did you stop? But I persisted because I felt that there was a better solution. And so now, to answer your question, Clarissa, I felt that using plastic, especially recycled plastic, so that I wasn't like polluting, was a way to embed a narrative about the problems that are creating loss of species across the board. I am particularly, enamored of birds, but the birds are stand-ins for any species that are, that are declining, and unfortunately, that's most of them, including us.
Yes.
So we're also losing our habitats, and that's part of, we can sidebar that for later, but that's part of the problem of the loss of indigenous languages as well. So by choosing to use the plastic, and then going back to my own roots of design and silk screening, I was able to reintegrate the specific images of birds. Now, they're cut up. You may or may not be able to read them clearly, but they're there. And then overlaying the indigenous languages. So again, you may not be able to read a whole lot of it, but they're there. And so now the content of my work is embedded in every single feather. And just back to the thing about, maybe you could open up Red Wing just as an example.
Yeah, let's look at this work as we're talking about it.
I think it would be helpful. I just finished this in the last month. This is a piece that's probably 9 feet across and 4.5 feet high. It's done in 3 sections so that I can ship it. And okay, what do you see? It looks like textiles. It looks textural. It's a lot of materiality. It's a lot of textility. And yet, if you zoom into it, those feathers hold all the information that I just mentioned. So the work is abstract, and yet it's full to the brim of information.
Yeah, I am really fascinated and impressed with that place of taking materials and history and embedding that into a piece of work. I think what you were talking about how taking what we want to communicate and then finding a way for us to put it into our artwork without it being something that like is knocking you over the head or is too obvious.
Right.
You've done an amazing job of that.
Well, I thank you for that. I'm kind of passionate about it. I don't teach year round, but I do teach occasionally. Like I go to colleges and I'll teach how to use recycled materials in your art. But I also love giving crits and talking to students about how do you marry your content in your form in order to make more powerful work.
Yeah. So if you were going to just sum up what the advice to people, because I know that this is an issue that a lot of us struggle with, what kind of direction would you point people in?
I think it's really important not to be complacent about your work, even if it's selling and even if it's showing. I think periodically, a lot of us have journals, or a lot of us are in support groups, or, a lot of us do a lot of self-introspection, as part of cultivating our, becoming better people and learning and growing. And I think taking a moment and stepping back from your work and asking yourself, is this saying what is it I want to say? And is this work saying it?
Yeah, that's great. That is fabulous. I see that Christy just said, the Red Wing piece reminds me of ritual feathered cloaks I've seen in museums. Yeah, very much so.
Okay, so I believe that we are certainly products of our childhoods and things that we've been exposed to. And I had the great good fortune of being born and raised in New York City. And I just met another resident artist who also was born and raised in New York. And we said, we spent our childhoods going to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and looking at the African, masks and the African ritual objects and the Egyptian, section of the Met. And I think that imagery kind of embeds,
Yeah. What a fabulous background. And you can really see it in your work, see that influence.
I wouldn't say it's that conscious in most cases, but I certainly have read books about ceremonial objects of the Amazon that use like a lot of feathers and have these wonderful headdresses. And now my production studio's in Mexico, so I'm surrounded with more of that color and indigenous life. And so, we are who we are. It seeps into the work. It seeps into our souls.
Yeah, that's great. So a lot of the work that you do is very large scale, and you do almost installation kind of quality. And I know I do installations also. And one of the things that people ask me is, how on earth do you make that many pieces? What is the person hours behind, a large installation, a large exhibition? So I would love to hear, I know a bit about your process, but would you tell us more about how you're able to produce such large pieces of work with such complexity?
Of course. I have what I call a team-based practice. So what that means to me is that I have on a weekly basis at least 4 Mexican women working in my studio doing various things that make it possible for me to produce the thousands of feathers that I need in order to make the large work. And there's no way I could do it without them. And when I moved to Mexico, it was only after living here a few years that I realized, I have the space I couldn't afford north of the border. I have the team that I couldn't afford north of the border. And I have the time because I had retired. So that was a very fortunate constellation of events. And I always, at my exhibitions, how at the end of the movie, you love to watch all the credits. And I'm always like, God, there's hundreds of people involved in making a movie. I always list all my credits. And I like to give credit to all the dozens of people that are involved to one degree or another in the making of my work. And I feel like it's a really beautiful circle. Like I couldn't do it without them. And many of these women maybe have a 5th grade education and not a lot of prospects in the world. And they have this cool job working for an artist, and they're not going to lose their job as long as I'm working. So it's a lovely circular, everyone's helping each other. And largely it's a women's community. So I love that. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. And that makes sense. Putting all those people, those pieces, that information all together, and blending it to make these amazing creations. Yeah. So I would think that I have thought about hiring assistants and working with a team. And as an introvert, that is scary to me, I have to say. So how do you deal with a lot of people being in your studio on a regular basis?
Well, I've been described as an extroverted introvert, which means when I have to do something like this, I can do it. But my go-to and the place where I feel most centered is when I'm alone. So, and on the other hand, I need all these people. So the studio is very busy in the mornings. My team straggles in between 10:30, and they work until 1:30 or 2. But after 2 o'clock, the studio empties out and I'm alone. And I'm alone until probably usually 7 o'clock. And I work at least 7 days a week at this point. I have a lot of exhibitions coming up, and I have to work. There's a lot of work to do. So that's the balance, is that I absolutely need the alone time, but there's no way I could produce what I have to produce without help. So
Right. Yeah, yeah, it's definitely that balance. Well, again, the exciting elephant in the room is that you just had pieces acquired by the Museum of Art and Design. That is, I am so envious and I am so happy for you. It is
thank
so
you.
amazing to see
Thank
women's
you.
fiber art ending up where it should be and having the recognition that it had. So how to tell us more about that process. I think that somewhere in our heads, a lot of us like dream of having our work in a museum. And what does that take? How do you get to that place? Tell us all your secrets, please.
I do. I actually have a bunch of secrets to tell you. Let's see. I want to just step back before I dive in there and say that
Yeah.
I have been very fortunate throughout my life to have mentors and supporters and benefactors, people who really
Mm,
believe in me. And while I wouldn't say I've been as confident as I may appear right now,
yeah.
I never doubted that I was an artist, and I never doubted
Mm,
I was a good artist because too many people were telling me that I was. I was like, who am I to tell them that they're like lying to me?
there you
Uh,
go.
so that I want to sort of claim that, and also encourage
Mm,
people to have mentors and supporters. In terms of the acquisition, I also have a blog on my website about it that was just posted. If anyone wants to be on my website, I think my email is going to be in a link somewhere.
I'm sure that we'll get it out there.
And I'm also on Instagram, Deborah Kruger Studios with an S. So it's easy to get in touch with me on Instagram and then we can chat there. So I have some childhood friends who have the great good fortune of having some financial stability that I've never had. And one of them suggested that maybe the charity that she had inherited could buy the work and donate it to the museum. And we hear about museums acquiring work, and the inside story is that even really, really, really big museums these days have very limited acquisition budgets, and they depend on their donors and they depend on other people, including the artists, to donate to the museum. So in this case, I was paid, and that was like completely amazing. And it was, again, everyone benefited from that transaction. When I spoke to the curator at the museum, Alyssa Author is the contemporary curator at the Museum of Arts and Design. She was so excited about having such a huge piece to show, because if anyone has been in New York or planning to go to New York, it's my favorite museum. So the whole thing is like a complete dream come true. If you were going to say, what museum, would you want to go to? My very first top choice would be the Museum of Arts and Design. And I feel like my work with the materiality and the fiber and the textiles, art and design museums, I think, is my sweet spot in institutions that would really appreciate what I'm doing. So I hope that answers some of it, but please hop on the website and read about MAD and how it happened. And I go into a little more nitty gritty there. And, there may be some wealthy people in your life that would just love to support you, but you got to ask them.
There we go.
They asked me. In my case, I didn't ask them, but I might
Rita has
somebody else.
Yeah. Rita was saying, your retirement was the beginning of an exciting adventure. My artistic adventure started when I was made redundant 20 years ago. So that's fabulous. Things that don't work out, well, not fabulous. Sorry, Rita, but it is interesting how things that are hard can lead us to other fabulous pieces. So,
Oh, I mean, I am a great believer in silver linings. Like, if you look for it. There's always something good in every hardship, every disaster. So for me, I owned a medical billing company. That there couldn't be anything further from an art life, although I always was an artist and I always had a studio and I showed a little bit, but I was a single mom and, I didn't have a lot of time. And I had a terrible flood at my house in Western Mass. Well, it was 12 to 13 years ago now. And the upshot of that was that I ended up moving to Mexico. So, I came to Mexico because I had a financial disaster in my life, but it ended up being the best thing that could have possibly happened to me as an artist. So, you just got to listen for the messages that are coming through.
Come in life. Yeah.
Now I understand. Now I understand the picture. Like,
Yeah.
I'm good with what happened. At the time, it was, hard and scary and sad, and I don't feel any of those ways anymore. I feel grateful.
Yeah.
Deeply, deeply grateful.
So, and you just started working professionally as an artist, full time as an artist. Did you say, I can't remember, was it 10 years ago approximately?
I would say even less. I mean,
Less. Yeah.
full time, I would say 7 years ago.
Yeah.
Again, I've been an artist for 40 years. One of my friends always says, "Oh, you're the overnight success that took 40 years."
Right. Which
We're
I
all
think,
there, grinding away, doing the work. I always did the work. You can go on my website and look at my CV. It's quite long and it goes back many years. But in terms of, working 6.5 days a week, that's like for the last 6 or 7 years. And I just can't wait to wake up in the morning and get back to work. I'm ecstatic.
yeah. Yeah. I think that's an interesting thing in our world, how we see, the overnight success, the like, wow, she's made it overnight. And like you said, there is the 40 years of hard work behind it.
Yeah.
I also really, just want to put out there as encouragement to everybody that it is also never too late. It is never too late to make it. It is never too late to do, what your heart wants to do. And you are an amazing example of that. And I have just all the awe in where you are in your career.
I really appreciate that. And I also feel that it's incumbent on me and other artists who have accomplished that rare thing of like getting, a little moment in the spotlight, of passing it forward. I do have a very, very small consultation practice. I can only spare the time to like see 3 or 4 people a week, but I feel like I have a lot to offer younger artists, or maybe not younger than me, but aspiring, like how does it work? Where am I stuck? Give me a hand. We all need a hand. We all need a hand. None of us get here without help, a lot of help. So, I think there's a page on my website that says consultations. If anyone feels like, oh yeah, I'd love a hand, just get in touch with me.
Marilyn agrees. Started at 62 and onward. Yay.
Absolutely.
I love it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that community and mentorship and connection is so important for us artists, because sometimes the art can be really solitary. You have people working with you, which is great, but a lot of us are in that studio alone. So that's one of the fabulous things about the Fibre Arts Take Two community, is how we are like connecting and supporting each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm looking down at, like, I had all kinds of questions for you. And one of them was, you are a busy woman with doing a lot of things. And I'm interested in what kind of support does it take for you to be able to show up regularly to do this? I know you love your practice, but also it's a lot to show up every morning and make.
Great question. Well, let me also, everything has a little bit of a background story, right? So when I was born and raised in New York, and I lived most of my adult life in Western Mass, Amherst, Mass, that area. And I was in an artist support group for 25 years. And the number of women in the group were 5 to 7, but we met every single month for 25 years. And it wasn't just crits. I mean, we really talked about, how do I be an artist and be a mother? How do I be an artist and take care of my aging parent? How do I be an artist and be married to a woman or a man? You know, how do I manage this life that is so important to me in a world that doesn't really value it that much, but it's everything to me, even though I'm not making a living from it. And so I urge you, all of you that are listening, to find at least one or two other people that are there for you. And they don't even have to be artists. They really don't. Like, one of my very, very best supporters is my childhood friend, Alice, who is a poet. And talking to people who are committed to a creative practice that may not be exactly yours is very rich. So I wouldn't even say it only has to be with fiber artists. But being committed and showing up is a muscle. And that's why they call it an art practice. And many of you who are listening have like a yoga practice, or you have a spiritual practice, or something along those lines, a meditation practice. And that's the word, that's the same as practice, that something becomes your regular thing by doing it more and more and making it. And I, now that I'm retired and this is my full-time life, I mean, we woke up and went to our jobs all of those decades ago, you know, and took care of family if we had one, and, you know, did what we had to do. This is what I have to do. This is why I'm here. I mean, I did a lot of other good things in my life, but I really truly feel like making this work is why I'm on the earth. I'm really clear that this is why I'm here. And so it's a pleasure, it's a privilege, it's an honor, and it's a responsibility for me to show up every day.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about the muscle. And also the word practice. I think sometimes we think we have to show up, and every day we show up, it's a perfect, wonderful thing. You know, practice means sometimes we fall down. Sometimes it's hard, you know, just like yoga or working out or taking a walk. Some days you don't want to do it. So I really appreciate you talking about, you know, the concept of practice, of showing up for ourselves. So
and let me also, as an addendum, say that once in a while, I take a day off. You know, I mean, I'm not like, you know, I'm human and I need to feed my human and be a human being instead of a human doing. And there were some artists that were just here in the 360 Xochi Quetzal residency just this past week. And one of them hadn't been to the thermal spa yet. And I was like, oh, sister, we got to go to the spa. So I took a day off and I spent the day in the thermal waters, and it was incredibly nourishing and rejuvenating. So, you know, I'm not, I feel like at this point, I feel like I have good time management, but that also took, you know, decades to figure out. And you're always recalibrating it. You know, now I don't have children, but now I have grandchildren. So, you know, like Sunday I'm flying to North Carolina and my daughter's like, Mom, you couldn't be coming in a better week. I'm like completely underwater and I need you to like drive the kids and pick up the kids and make dinner. And I'm like, Mom, just give me my schedule, you know.
From artist to, you know, to supporter of children. Yeah.
You know, we do what we have to do. And I think women have part of I think our, you know, how we're socialized is that most of us are really good at juggling a lot of things.
Yeah, I think we have to be. Yeah. So I have a question about your materials. How do you collect the plastics as we are recycling and are stopping a lot of using plastic bags?
That's true.
That's really, really interesting. Yeah.
It's a great question. The first few years, doesn't everyone have a bag of plastic bags in their house, right?
Or maybe 20.
No, right, or 20. So initially I put a little call out to my community and I said, hey, if you have a bag of plastic bags, like it would really help me out. Well, then I had this year of like washing them out and drying them out and cutting them up. And I was like, okay, that's not the most efficient use of anyone's time. But I have subsequently found a source of recycled plastic in Guadalajara. So that our nearest big city is Guadalajara, and it's about like 50 minutes north of where I'm living on Lake Chapala. And periodically we go up and we get some recycled plastic. Even some of its bags and some of its rolls, but I make sure it's recycled.
Yeah. So what made you want to work with this this material that is, not fine art? What made you decide to work with plastic instead of like canvas or silk or watercolor paper?
Great question. My work as an environmental artist requires that I walk my talk as much as I can. I mean, life isn't pure. But like probably a lot of you who are listening, don't you have bags of scraps of what you're doing that are laying around, that I use a lot of my scraps. I also am committed to working with a recycled material if it's not going to be a natural material, because as I said before, it refers back to the themes in my work. So without even saying anything, my work starts talking about the problems of consumption that are driving habitat fragmentation, which is, at the root cause of a lot of things. And then, of course, the collapse of our climate and the world as we know it. So all of these things are interrelated.
Yeah. Another question from Melanie. Melanie is curious. It was a two-part, but it's basically, how much time do you devote to social media? I mean, social media is a whole conversation. It's a whole interview in itself. But we would both love to hear, like, what's your take on it? Yeah,
sure. Very important. My favorite social media is Instagram. So I still completely manage my own Instagram feed. Again, it's Deborah Kruger Studios with an S. That's my handle. And I would love, if you're not following me, for you to follow me. And, we can dialogue there. I feel like my Instagram is a cross between a journal and a love letter, to the people who are following me. It's my personal, like, here's what's going on for me. Now, I'm very fortunate that I have several people that are helping me with social media. Again, I'm living in a country where I can afford that kind of support. So I'll send the pieces of my Instagram to another woman, Tyler, who's on my team. And then she understands that, like, LinkedIn has a more professional tone than Facebook, which is more folksy and personal. And she massages that material for each of my other social medias. So I don't personally post on all the media, but I think social media is important. I have found connections with galleries. My husband laughs at me. I have really made friends with a lot of you on social media.
Yeah.
You're not your friends. I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
They're my friends. I Zoom with them. I'm going to be going to London next fall. I'll be seeing some of my my Instagram friends that are fiber artists in London. You know who you are.
Yeah.
So I feel like I also get a lot of support from Instagram. And when I wake up in the morning, it is one of the first things. Well, no, confession. First, I have coffee. Then I go upstairs and I lift weights for 20 to 30 minutes. Yeah. Because I really have to be strong to do what I do. I like really got to keep it going. And then walk if I have time. And then I hop on Instagram and I'm like, oh, I wonder what my friends in Australia did yesterday.
Yeah.
So I feel like I get very fed by all of you around the world and seeing, like, what are they working on? And I get very inspired. And we go back to what support we need. When I see that my colleagues everywhere, Malaysia, UK, South Korea, you know, are producing what they're producing and showing where they're showing, it's like, I feel supported by that. I'm not alone. I don't
Yeah.
feel so alone.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
we're my community. We're
Right.
all in it together.
Right. I mean, there's all kinds of problematic pieces about social media and the internet and the connection. But the amazing thing is the ability to connect. I mean, without it, I wouldn't know people in Australia. I wouldn't know you. So, it's got a positive and a negative, but it's
You have to
wonderful.
control it. Like I
Yeah.
would say on a daily basis, maybe I'm on Instagram a total of an hour and a half. So that might include making a post. And anyone who says you can make a post in 5 minutes, I mean, really?
Yeah. Who are they?
I don't know who they are, but I don't think that's true. Because I do research on hashtags. Like if someone wants a consult on social media, come on, I got a lot of things to tell you. But I do think we've all heard about the algorithms and things of that nature.
Mhm.
But like if you can post 3 reels a week about your studio practice, you're going to see your social media grow and not just feed you, but start that
Mhm.
kind of interaction with people.
Yeah.
I don't think it has to
Sure.
be a crazy thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I have another comment. Obviously, plastic is very problematic, but I also find it very beautiful and interesting material. Do you respond to its aesthetic qualities as well as its meaning? That's great. Yeah, what a good question. Thank
I
you, Christy.
sure do. And I'll tell you, let's look at accidentals. If
Okay,
you can bring that up.
gotcha. Let me just get to the right place. Yeah.
This is one of the 2 pieces that was just acquired by the Museum of Arts and Design in New York. And this has been displayed twice. It debuted in Mexico City, and then it was at a museum in my state of Jalisco, the train station museum. And the museum had a lot of air coming through it. And so the feathers like moved. And it was so like lovely. I don't think it was great for the artwork, but it was beautiful. And I think one could replicate that in a more in a sort of a more controlled environment with a fan or something like that. But aesthetically, the plastic feathers actually move more with more dance and choreography than the fabric that I had been using previously. So I would have to say yes. Aesthetically,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thunk it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting,
I would not have thought
Yeah.
it. But,
Yeah.
in the course of serving my environmental message, I ended up with a solution that was also very aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah, I find it interesting that we have this hierarchy of materials. These are fine art and these are good materials and these are, lowbrow materials. And, my take is always is they're just different, like what you said, the cloth didn't move as well as the plastic. So that's just a great way to look at our materials.
Right. And I have to say, this was one of the things you and I talked about a few weeks ago. I'm not a product of academia. I went to trade school and I learned how to do textile design. And I guess I would say I'm not hobbled by the expectations of academia and what is fine art. Like that's just never been an issue for me. So I think a lot of people who've gone and gotten BFAs and MFAs have had to unlearn that.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't had to struggle with that personally.
Yeah.
I just feel like if it works and it says what I want it to say, then I'm using it. And I think there's been a big shift in the art world in the last certainly 10 years where there's not enough women showing, but there's a lot more women showing. And there's a lot more people using fiber and mixed materials. So that's really shaken things up quite a bit. And I think that, for the good.
Another great question coming in. This is from Anna Wagner-Ott, who I got the privilege of interviewing probably about a month ago. Another
Hi,
amazing
Anna.
fiber artist.
Instagram friends.
Yeah, more Instagram friends. That's awesome. So how do you decide on the color choices? Do you go to bird images to get color inspiration? And I have to say, being in Deborah's studio, her little color layouts are amazing. So I'm curious, like, how does she get to that place?
Okay, great question. Thank you, Anna. I'm so glad you're here. Clarissa, could you put up Kimono 2?
Yes.
Would you mind grabbing that? Great. So while my work is largely very color saturated, and of course, we know bird plumage, a lot of bird plumage is also color saturated. Periodically, I make some artwork that is largely white or monotone. And for me, that's an opportunity just to kind of rest a little bit visually. And I think this kimono is a good example. Now, if you look at it, there's a lot of color in there, but it reads white with, the blue down the middle. And like other pieces, which actually maybe you could flip over to Ropa Arco piece, and then I'll really get to answer Anna's question. I do have also an ongoing series of artwork forms that are inspired by indigenous women's clothing. And, there's ways that I don't think any of us really completely understand our work. Like, we do the work, we do our thinking, we do the best we can, but we're only us, we only have our own frame of reference to deal with. And you learn more about your work over time. So over time, I realize not only is my work about endangered birds, endangered languages, it's also about endangered clothing, endangered women's culture. So the culture of kimono is, we know it, but it isn't like a growing culture. It's a thing that is mostly of the past. Mm-hmm. And the we peel shape that was just up is a shape of an indigenous women's woven blouse that's very common in Chiapas, Mexico, and Guatemala, and is hand woven. And there's less and less of the women making those. So even my choice to do silk screening, I mean, everything's digital. So when I finally decided to do silk screening, it felt like coming a full circle and coming to my own roots. It's like, like when I was a textile designer and we had to offer another colorway, we went to the textile, to the screen printing lab and say, I need it green and I need it in red and, that sort of thing. And so to choose to silk screen in a digital world also feels like, oh, that's a little endangered too. So I see these things after the fact, but I think also when we are dedicated to our work, it becomes, the water clears, the muddiness clears, and we can see what we're doing and understand what we're doing more. And I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. Here's another technical question. How do you make the plastic feathers end with a point? Is it a machine?
No. Okay. Great question. Thank you. So let me think of how I want to start to answer this. Remember I said at the beginning that there's probably 20 steps to making the feathers because they're very kind of neurotic. There's a woman on my team that cuts the long feathers. She cuts them into long, I call them tail feathers. And she does put a point on them, which I usually have to change a little bit when I'm really grooming the piece. And I also have the curved feathers, which have a point. And those are cut out from these sample shapes that we give the team. And someone said to me once, well, can't you just like stamp them, somehow cut them out altogether, like use some kind of stamp? And I feel like another part of this whole circle that I'm in is that employing women feels really important to me. Really important. So yeah, could I have a machine do it? I'm sure I could. But I want a human hand in the work. And if it's not always going to be my human hand, I want some other woman's human hand in the work. And
Yeah.
I want to be able to offer these women, employment into the future. So that's part of it for me. Yeah.
So those points are literally hand cut by yourself or by one of. Yeah, that's amazing.
There's a lot of videos on my Instagram feed where you see me,
cool.
Cutting.
Doing the cutting. Yeah. I love that that's another element that comes into the work too. It's another piece. We're just adding layer upon layer that isn't, necessarily obvious to the viewer, but I believe adds that richness and connects it in with your intention. It's beautiful.
And I feel like people, let me say this in the affirmative. I think people can enjoy my work, not understand the whole process, and enjoy my work and not understand what my message is. Making something that's beautiful, I feel like, is a radical act in a world that's kind of falling apart. And a lot of my artwork and the research behind it is very depressing. So making an object that's beautiful, I feel like, is just my way of holding it all together. In my Jewish tradition, we have a beautiful concept called tikkun olam, which translates in Hebrew to repairing the world.
You're repairing the world with your art.
I'm repairing the world with my art, and that it's incumbent on everyone to repair the world in some small way. And so that I can do that in my artwork and repair the lives of these women and, make art that's very beautiful and also very meaningful. That all just is very satisfying.
Yeah. So earlier you referenced languages and extinction of languages. I wonder, would you tell us more about that? Because we think about extinction with a lot of other things, but we don't necessarily associate it with language. So please share with us more.
Thank you. It wasn't something I intended to integrate into the work, but it's something that came to my attention. So over time, I learned that the reasons that birds are going extinct or having their populations endangered, the same reasons were endangering humans, especially indigenous cultures: habitat fragmentation, climate change, the consumption of say, rainforests being clear cut because, people need the land for grazing and that sort of thing. So the facts, as I understand them, is that at this moment, there are 7,000 languages spoken worldwide, and that by the year 2100, there will be 3,000 languages remaining. And if you go on Google and just type in last remaining speaker of, a whole slew of articles will come up. And I think that's very sad that we're losing. You lose a language. There's so much culture embedded in a language. I mean, when I moved to Mexico 12 years ago, I didn't speak any Spanish. I spoke some French, and that was helpful. But in the course of learning Spanish, I learned about the Mexican culture because it's all embedded in the language. And so when we lose all these languages, we're losing their history. We're losing their wisdom. We're losing information about native plants that heal people. We're just losing more. It's just it's heartbreaking. And I also, I'm from a Jewish family that were Holocaust survivors.
Wow.
And when they came to the United States, they spoke Yiddish. and except in Hasidic communities, Yiddish is a dying language. And over the course of my own lifetime, I saw the demise of this beautiful linguistic culture. At the time that my family arrived in New York, there was Yiddish theater and Yiddish, many, many, many Yiddish newspapers and, all kinds of culture that was in Yiddish that doesn't exist hardly at all anymore.
Yeah.
So I, even in my own culture, have seen that, and that's probably made me sympathetic and aware and concerned about other cultures because it touched my life as well.
Yeah. So these are part of the words that are overprinted
Yeah.
over the bird images. Yeah. So
I
Yiddish.
actually work with an ethno-linguist at the University of Guadalajara, and we are constantly collecting languages. We have quite a few Mayan languages that are still spoken, but not as much as they once were. And then with a calligrapher. So that's a whole process.
Yeah, so many layers.
So,
Rita has a great thing to say. Indigenous artist Tracy Deep says birds are losing their songs, which is causing slow extinction due to their loss of territory. Just fascinating that birds could actually lose their songs, all interconnected.
that kind of says it all.
Yeah.
Well, my little slogan is art with a voice. So I like to feel like I'm giving the voiceless a voice.
Yeah, very much. That's great. All right. What kind of inspiration do you have for us to all go out there and make art with?
Well, I had a pin that I used to wear in the 1980s, and it said, "Art saves lives." And I always lived by that. I always felt like art certainly makes my life richer, and it enriches other people's lives. So if you don't already believe that, I'm telling you, it's true. It makes a difference, and it makes the world a better place when you make art and put your voice out into the world. It's important, and don't let anyone tell you the contrary.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Okay, so we are coming to the end of our hour. Is there anything else anyone would like to ask quickly? Okay, we'll give them the things. So I am going to play the exit, and while we play the little lovely exit video, please woo! See, I'm getting towards the end. My tongue is stopping to work, you guys. Please show some gratitude for Deborah and for Fibre Take Two for taking the time to make this possible. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. And thank you, Fibre Art Takes Two, your fabulous team, and all the work that you're doing to support fiber artists, not just in Australia, but all of us around the world. And I'm honored that you chose me to feature here today. And thank you, Clarissa. And I'm so glad for our professional and personal connection. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a blessing. Thank you for having this conversation and talking about so many important things. Yeah.
And I once again invite people to follow me on Instagram, Deborah Kruger Studios with an S, and let's keep the conversation going.
Yes, very much so. Thank you, Deborah.